Good afternoon. Wow. I'm Dawn Newton, and I am the COO and founder of NetKey. That's the official title of my talk, CYA for KYC. Can I have a look at the audience? So how many of you have done token sales already? Okay. And how many are considering doing a token sale or an ICO? All right, a couple hands. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about NetKey. Between my co-founder and I, we have over 20 years of startup experience, starting with the early internet. And my co-founder is one of the few people who can say he actually wrote open source protocols for the internet that are still in use today, and has also contributed to blockchain protocols. The company has been in the blockchain space for over 4 years now, and we are the leading KYC provider in the space, and working with exchanges, token sales, ICOs, et cetera. So what I'm going to cover is the history of the enforcement actions in the space, then go over what best practices we have and what we can expect in the future as things are rapidly changing in regards to enforcement. So the early years, 2018 to 2014. So there was very little regulatory oversight at that time, and the network was thought to be anonymous. But in reality, through the use and reuse of wallet addresses over and over again, and the lack of KYC, what we actually did was bring together the worst of both worlds. Because third-party providers using analytics were able to track who was transacting with who, but yet it was difficult for someone to independently tell who that they were transacting with. So the first selected enforcement that happened is Ripple. So this is FinCEN, which is out of the Treasury. They had a $700,000 fine and issued a consent decree. And the issue was AML. So this was no jail time. This was considered basically in the financial sector to be a slap on the wrist. And it was the first shot across the bow into our industry to put us on notice that the regulatory agencies were watching what we're doing. So they asked Ripple to control their processes so that they could be compliant with AML, and Ripple did so. So then next was the middle years, 2014 to just mid-2017 last year. So this was the period where the focus was on the fiat to crypto border, and enforcement begins, which starts off that larger exchanges started to do and put in place official KYC programs. Before that time, you could get online and get on an exchange in a single day. Now they were putting KYC in place, but it was manual, and it was time-consuming, and you started to see delays in being able to onboard clients. So this enforcement that came down was Bitfinex, and this was 2016. So this was the CFTC, which is the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. And what they determined, in their opinion, was that BTC was a commodity. And unlike money, the actual asset had to be in the individual person's account. And so what was important here was that at the time, we were all of us going around saying that, oh, it's just like a bank account. Except they didn't see it that way. And so in order to be compliant, we need to know what the technical definitions are. So even though it made sense to all of us that it was treated like a bank account, they said no, and an enforcement action took place on that. So now we've got mid-2017, was just recently, to present day. So international enforcement begins. So you've got South Korea, China, Japan, all starting to say that ICOs had to give the money back that they had already collected. The focus goes crypto to crypto, and they're also surely looking at token sales. At this point, the onboarding is now getting to be incredibly time-consuming at the exchanges and at the wallet providers. And people are having trouble onboarding as we grow and expand into the mainstream. The waits just keep getting longer. So these are several enforcement actions recently. So we have BTCE. So FinCEN, this is FinCEN again. Okay, the operator was arrested on vacation. This is where you might have heard that it happened in a beach in Greece, and 21 criminal counts. 21. Okay, so the difference, or the thing here is that being registered overseas okay? And being physically overseas didn't matter. They call it the long arm of the law for a reason. And so he didn't think that his company needed to be compliant. And yet right now, at this minute, he's sitting in an Interpol prison waiting to be extradited to the US. Okay, this enforcement was Munchie. This was a token sale. Okay, this came under the SEC, which is the Security Exchange Commission. And they looked at this and they decided that it wasn't a token and that they were selling an unregistered security. So they got a cease and desist order, fine, no jail, but they had to return all the funds that they worked on collecting. Okay, so now we're Jay Clayton, who is the SEC chairman, and Christopher Giancarlo, who is the chairman of the CFTC, issued a joint op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal, full page, putting us on notice that they are watching all of us in the space. Centra, this just happened. So it's the SEC again, and this is the two guys where they said that it's fraud, that they were committing fraud, and one of them got popped actually trying to board a plane to exit the country. So now, we're all not doing this in this space, but when something like this happens, in order to catch people like this, it means that enforcement is looking even harder at all of us. So their fault is extra scrutiny for all of us. So where does that leave us today? We know we've got multiple agencies in the US watching us. We've got global enforcement stepping up. Today, just today, India went and put all the banks on notice in India to say that they can't do business with us anymore, people in the crypto space. And that just happened a few hours ago. Okay? So global enforcement is definitely stepping up, and yet we need to be handling all of these regulations while we're all trying to grow a business. So what are some of the things that you need to do if you're considering doing a token sale? So you need to ensure that the ID is valid and it's real. You also need to ensure that the person presenting you with the ID is the person on the ID. You have to check sanctions and watch lists, and also what's known as a negative news check. If you want to take money from corporations, you have to make sure that their legal filings are correct. They've got a relative tax ID. You have to have the KYC of all the signatories on the account, which means the people who are authorized to use corporate funds. You also need to have KYC done on all the beneficial owners. And even in US agencies, from agency to agency, the definition changes, as does the definition from country to country. So it starts to get really complicated with what you need to do when. And then you also still, with all of these, have to check the sanctions, the watch list, and the negative news for all of these individuals, simply by wanting to take money from a corporation. Accredited investor. This is something that people think only applies to the United States. That's not true. There are several countries that require you to validate that the individual you're taking funds from is an accredited investor, and of course, none of them are in agreement with what that actually is, and they all have different criteria for what is an accredited investor. So on this one, that's the other. It's best to use third parties. So there's experts, there's lawyers, and there's accountants that can take in this financial information from individuals and validate it, and they will give them a letter that says that they have checked the credentials and that this person is indeed an accredited investor, and you can take money from them. So the ID, things that you need to check. Is the ID real? You can check that by having has it been tampered with? It needs to not be expired. It has to be, of course, legible. And I can't tell you how many times we've seen this with ICOs and token sales that we've done. It cannot be a photo of your computer with the ID on it, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're seeing that happen. It has to be a photo of the actual ID. matching the individual to the ID. This is something that a lot of the KYC companies that are out there are skipping over. Simply taking in the passport or the ID isn't enough. The agencies both in the US and in other countries require that you confirm that the person who gave you the ID is the person who is the holder of that ID. I'm an employer. I collect IDs when everybody onboards. I can take photos of their ID. So, and then anybody can get a stolen ID on the dark web. So that's another point that they require, that you know that the actual individual is the person presenting you with that identification. Sanctions, watch lists, and negative news. With us, we do all of those things, but we actually do it so that you can determine your risk profile. So you need to talk with your lawyers, your compliance officers, and determine for your business and for what agencies are going to be looking at you, what risk do you want to establish? And then based on that, we can tighten or loosen what the results are that you'll get from those systems. So what you'll need to do. You're going to need to take the time to figure this all out and listen to what the lawyers have to say about which regulatory agencies may want to look at you and what you'll fall under. You can outsource KYC and AML, but you cannot outsource the liability. So anyone telling you that their generic KYC is going to cover you isn't taking into account that all these agencies don't even agree with what's required. So if you think about it, if you have an accountant do your taxes and he or she makes a mistake, the IRS will certainly let you refile, but you're on the hook for any of the financial mishap that occurred and for the fines, not your accountant. So it's the same thing here. So all compliance doesn't cover, and so you just need to know and check with a lawyer on what it is that you specifically need. And if you do want to cover your ass for KYC, come talk to NetKey. We have the booth in the middle that has the white sofa and tables and chairs. So thanks for listening.